Did you know that a well-crafted introduction can make or break your research project? It's the first impression setting the stage for your entire study. Avoid common pitfalls and ensure your introduction captivates from the start. In this video, we'll look at the 7 essential ingredients of a strong applied research project introduction chapter, as well as the essential things you need to keep in mind as you craft each section. We'll also share some useful tips to help you optimize your approach. Start with why. The introduction chapter sets the stage for your applied research project. Its purpose is to help readers understand your research focus, what you're trying to figure out, or the problem you're solving. To do this, you must answer 4 key questions. These questions are: what will you be researching? Why is that worthwhile? What will the scope of your research be? What will the limitations of your research be? This is where you state the potential shortcomings of your applied research project. The first ingredient in your introduction is a clear opening. State what the chapter will accomplish and keep it simple and engaging. Even in academic writing, clarity matters. If readers struggle, they lose interest. Think of it like selling an idea, your research idea. So what goes into this opening section? Well, while there's no set formula, it is important to include the following 4 foundational sentences in your opening section. First, you should have 1 or 2 sentences that introduce your research. For example, organizational skills development involves identifying current or potential skills gaps within a business and developing programs to resolve these gaps. Management research, including X, Y, and Z, has clearly established that organizational skills development is an essential contributor to business growth. You will also want to include a sentence introducing your specific research problem. For example, however, there are conflicting views and an overall lack of research regarding how best to manage skills development initiatives in highly dynamic environments where subject knowledge is rapidly and continuously evolving. For example, in the website development industry. You will want a sentence stating your research aims and objectives. For example, this research aims to identify and evaluate skills development approaches and strategies for highly dynamic industries in which subject knowledge is continuously evolving. A sentence outlining the layout of the chapter. For example, this chapter provides an introduction to the applied research project by discussing the background and context, the research problem, the research aims, objectives, and questions, the significance, and finally, the limitations. The introduction chapter shouldn't be lengthy. Typically, these 4 sentences should fit neatly into 1 or 2 paragraphs max. What you're aiming for here is a clear, concise introduction to your research, not a detailed account. After your overview, the next step is the background. This section lays the foundation for your study by giving context such as history, recent developments, and key research. The goal is to give readers a clear understanding of your topic area. Let's look at an example to make this a little more concrete. If we stick with the skills development topic I mentioned earlier, the background to the study section would start by providing an overview of the skills development area and outline the key existing research. Then, it would go on to discuss how the modern-day context has created a new challenge for traditional skills development strategies and approaches. Specifically, in many industries, technical knowledge is constantly and rapidly evolving, and traditional education providers struggle to keep up with the pace of recent technologies. Importantly, you need to write this section with the assumption that the reader is not an expert in your topic area. So, if there are industry-specific jargon and complex terminology, you should briefly explain that here so that the reader can understand the rest of your document. A research problem exists when there's a need to answer a question, but there is a gap in the existing literature, or there is a conflict and/or inconsistency. So, to present your research problem, you need to make it clear what exactly is missing in the current literature and why this is a problem. It's usually wise to structure this discussion into 3 sections, specifically: what's already well established in the literature, in other words, the current state of research; what's missing in the literature, in other words, the literature gap; why this is a problem, in other words, why it's important to fill this gap. Let's look at an example of this structure using this skills development topic. Organizational skills development is critically important for employee satisfaction and company performance. Numerous studies have investigated strategies and approaches to manage skills development programs within organizations. This paragraph explains what's already well established in the literature. However, these studies have traditionally focused on relatively slow-paced industries, where key skills and knowledge do not change particularly often. This body of theory presents a problem for industries that face a rapidly changing skills landscape. For example, the website development industry, where new platforms, languages, and best practices emerge on an extremely frequent basis. This paragraph explains what's missing from the literature. As a result, the existing research is inadequate for industries in which essential knowledge and skills are constantly and rapidly evolving, as it assumes a slow pace of knowledge development. Industries in such environments, therefore, find themselves ill-equipped in terms of skills development strategies and approaches. This paragraph explains why the research gap is problematic. As you can see in this example, in a few lines we've explained 1. The current state of research, 2. The literature gap, and 3. Why that gap is problematic. By doing this, the research problem is made clear, which lays the foundation for the next ingredient. Given the lack of research regarding organizational skills development in fast-moving industries, this study will aim to identify and evaluate the skills development approaches utilized by web development companies in the USA. As you can see in this example, the research aim is clearly outlined, as well as the specific context in which the research will be undertaken, in other words, web development companies in the USA. Next up is the research objective, or objectives. While the research aims cover the high-level what, the research objectives are a bit more practically oriented, looking at specific things you'll be doing to achieve those research aims. Let's take a look at an example of some research objectives, ROs, to fit the research aim. RO1, to identify common skills development strategies and approaches utilized by web IT professional in the United States. RO2, to evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies and approaches. RO3, to compare and contrast the development strategies and approaches in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. As you can see from this example, these objectives describe the actions you'll take and the specific things you'll investigate in order to achieve your research aims. The final step is stating your research questions. These make your aims concrete and specific. They guide your project and must be clearly answered in your conclusions chapter. The research questions should relate directly to the research objectives. Let's take a look at an example of the research questions that would flow from the research objectives discussed earlier. RQ1, what skills development strategies and approaches are currently being used by web development companies in the US? RQ2, how effective are each of these strategies and approaches? RQ3, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these strategies and approaches? As you can see, the research questions mimic the research objectives, but they are presented in question format. These questions will act as the driving force throughout your applied research project, from the literature review to the methodology and onward, so they're really important. A final note is to be clear about the scope of your study. Define what you will and won't cover. Keep your focus narrow, like a specific industry, grade level, or time period. Clear boundaries strengthen the depth and credibility of your work. Next is significance, explaining why your study matters. Show how it benefits academia, makes a difference, and highlights the impact of your research. Let's take a look at an example. This study will contribute to the body of knowledge on skills development by incorporating skills development strategies and approaches for industries in which knowledge and skills are rapidly and constantly changing. This will help address the current shortage of research in this area and provide real-world value to organizations operating in such dynamic environments. As you can see in this example, the paragraph clearly explains how the research will help fill a gap in the literature and also provide practical, real-world value to organizations. This section should be brief but convincing. Think of it as selling your research, show its unique value, and how it benefits both academia and industry. After selling your research, you'll also need to acknowledge its limitations. No study is perfect, and applied projects often face budget, time, and experience constraints. That's okay, limitations are expected. The key is to be transparent so future researchers can build on your work and strengthen it. Generally, you'll want to consider at least the following 4 common limitations. These are your scope. For example, perhaps your focus is very narrow and doesn't consider how certain variables interact with each other. Your research methodology. For example, a qualitative methodology could be criticized for being overly subjective, or a quantitative methodology could be criticized for oversimplifying the situation. Your resources. For example, a lack of time, money, equipment, and your own research experience. The generalizability of your findings. Remember, findings from one industry or country may not apply elsewhere. Don't hide limitations. Being open and critical only strengthens your research. Finally, include a structural outline, a roadmap of your project. Briefly explain each chapter's purpose in a sentence or two. Keep it simple, just an outline, not a full summary. Let's look at an example. In Chapter 1, the context of the applied research project is reviewed, and a foundation of theory will be laid out to identify key skills development and strategies within the context of fast-moving industries, especially technology-intensive industries. In Chapter 3, you will explore the methodological choices and the adoption of a qualitative, inductive research approach, and the broader research design will be discussed, including the limitations thereof. So, as you can see from the example, this section is simply an outline of the chapter structure, allocating a short paragraph to each chapter. Done correctly, the outline will help your reader understand what to expect and reassure them that you'll address the multiple facets of the study. Hopefully, you feel a bit more prepared for this challenge of crafting your applied research project introduction chapter now. Take a deep breath and remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. Conquer one ingredient at a time and you'll be firmly on the path to success. Let's recap the 7 ingredients: the opening, the background, the research problem, your aims and questions, the significance, the limitations, and the structural outline. Include these, and you'll create a strong, engaging introduction that sets the foundation for your project. Now take action. Begin drafting your introduction with these insights in mind. By doing so, you'll create a captivating start to your applied research project, ensuring it stands out and makes an impact. Good luck with this chapter.